Have you ever wondered what happens when the love of your life passes away and silence becomes a voice? In a small town surrounded by golden hills and trees dancing in the wind, lives an 81-year-old woman who knows exactly what that means. Every morning, the kitchen clock makes the same sound. Tick-tock, tick-tock. The sound seems louder since he left. Before, that hot coffee was filled with conversation, laughter, simple plans like choosing the day's bread. Now, there's only the sound of the cup touching the saucer and an echoing emptiness. For 52 years, she woke up next to the same man. They shared the same roof, the same fears, the same way of seeing the world. But one day, without warning, his body fell asleep forever, and she had to learn what no one teaches, to live without witnesses to her own life. Since then, the mornings have grown longer and the nights colder. The house still holds the scent of his perfume, the clothes in the closet, the letters that were never thrown away. Everything is a memory. Everything is pain. Have you ever experienced this? The kind of loss that doesn't scream, but eats away silently, a little bit each day. She did, and for a long time, she believed her story would end there, between the walls where time stood still. But life, in a discreet and mysterious way, always finds gaps to pulse again. Neighbors see her walking slowly to the mailbox, wearing a faded blue coat and a distant look in her eyes. No one can imagine what's going on inside her or what's about to happen, because grief, though heavy, sometimes turns into a gentle push toward the unexpected. What you're about to discover may surprise you. In the corner of the room, on an old wooden dresser, hangs a black and white photograph. In it, a young woman with loose hair holds a paintbrush, covered in paint up to her fingers, smiling as if she believes the future is a blank canvas. That woman was her, before her fears, before her routine, before she forgot who she was. She hadn't seen that image in years, but one glance was enough to make her heart race. It was at that moment that something inside her awakened, a flash, a reminder of what it means to truly live. It was as if time were saying, "There's still time," and she believed it. Still unsure how or where to begin, she felt something was about to change. In the following days, the cups remained in the same place. The clock continued to tick, but the silence no longer sounded the same. It was a different kind of silence, the kind that precedes a decision, the kind that carries promises. Stay with me until the end, because what this 81-year-old woman decided to do after this moment will challenge everything you imagine about aging, about courage, and about starting over when the world thinks it's too late. Sometimes, the first step toward rediscovering life begins with something simple, a memory, an image, a color, and in her case, it began with a forgotten paintbrush, a small gesture. That would completely change the course of her story. She stood there, staring at the old photo, for long minutes. The young face in it seemed to speak to her, reminding her of a forgotten part of herself. That's when she felt the urge to open the windows, to let the cold air in and mingle with the old smell of the house. There was something new in the air, something she couldn't explain, a desire to start over, even without knowing where. She picked up the phone, looked at her calendar, considered calling someone, but decided against it, because deep down, she understood that some decisions must be made in silence, and it was in this silence that she began to plan what would come next. A small step, perhaps a risk, perhaps a new beginning. The same brush that once painted dreams would once again color her life. As she watched the afternoon light filter through the curtains, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Not the hope of someone waiting for someone, but the hope of someone who decides to move. And perhaps this is what so many people forget, that life doesn't ask for permission to begin again. It just needs a gesture of courage. If this topic touches your heart, if this story somehow reminds you of someone or something that has been preserved in time, leave a comment below with what has touched you most so far. Sometimes, a simple sentence you write can inspire someone reading on the other side of the screen, someone who also needs to believe that there's still time to start over. And if this kind of story resonates with you, if it brings you a little comfort or hope in the midst of your busy days, please leave a like. This helps demonstrate that it's worth continuing to share real stories like this of people who transformed pain into strength and the end into a new beginning. Your participation here is what makes this channel grow, what makes these stories reach those who need to hear them. Every like, every comment, every new subscription is like a small flame lit, and it's with them that we continue to illuminate other lives. So, if you want to continue following these stories of courage, love, and new beginnings, subscribe to the channel. There are so many lives that still need to be told, so many lessons hidden in ordinary people, and you can be sure each new story is a reminder that it's never too late to rewrite your own life. Outside, the sun began to set, and for the first time in a long time, she wasn't afraid of the approaching night. Her brush, still clean, waited on the table, and something inside her told her that, come dawn, it would be the day to begin painting again. The days began to blend together. Outside, the seasons were changing. Summer was saying goodbye. Autumn was painting the trees with fiery hues, and the cold was announcing its arrival. But inside that house, time seemed to stand still. Each morning was the same as the last, the same lukewarm coffee, the same repeated news, the same feeling of emptiness. She tended the plants on the balcony as if trying to keep a part of herself alive that still breathes. She watered the flowers but forgot to water herself inside. Sometimes she talked to herself, pretending to talk to him, as if the sound of her own voice were a way to deceive her loneliness. The television turned on became a companion, even without the sound. It was a presence that demanded nothing, and perhaps that was why she kept it on all day. From afar, neighbors saw a calm, serene woman, well-adjusted with her age. But the hidden truth is that inside, she felt like a house where the lights had been turned off one by one until only darkness remained. And what hurts most isn't the silence. It's realizing that no one notices how much it weighs. Loneliness among the elderly is almost a silent epidemic. The streets are crowded, but hearts are often empty. And she was part of that invisible crowd. People who survive but no longer feel alive. Even so, there was something curious about the way she looked at the world. A mixture of longing and resilience, as if, deep down, she still believed that life could surprise. One afternoon, while tidying a shelf, she found an old note he'd written, "Never stop doing what makes you smile." The writing was shaky, but the memory came back clearly. It was as if a crack had opened in that wall of sadness. For a few seconds, her heart raced. A spark, small, but real. It was the memory of a forgotten promise, a reminder that there was still something inside her waiting to be awakened. That's when he began to realize how deceptive time can be. People say time heals everything, but she discovered that time only hides what hasn't been resolved. Grief, longing, loneliness, none of it goes away. You just learn to disguise yourself. And perhaps the true beginning begins when we stop pretending we're okay and accept that we need to rebuild ourselves. What was about to happen to this woman goes far beyond a simple story of overcoming adversity. It's about transformation of the mind, the soul, and the way we view our own destiny. The impact of our decisions goes far beyond what we imagine, and sometimes a small, almost imperceptible gesture can be the turning point of an entire life. That night, she looked in the mirror and almost didn't recognize herself. Her face looked more tired, but her eyes, those same eyes that once shone before a blank screen, were still there, just waiting for the moment to awaken. Emptiness doesn't disappear overnight, but she began to realize something new. Perhaps emptiness also has a purpose, to remind her of what needs to be filled. She was looking for something simple, an old scarf, perhaps a winter coat, but found something much larger, a forgotten piece of herself. At the back of the closet, among shoeboxes and dusty mementos, there was a photograph yellowed with age. In the image, a young woman smiled, her face stained with paint, holding a paintbrush before a blank canvas. Her gaze radiated lightness, freedom, and a joy that seemed to have been lost somewhere along the way. For a moment, the elderly woman's heart raced. Time stood still. The air felt different. It was as if the young woman in the photograph was watching her back, asking, "Do you still remember me?" She held the photo carefully, as if touching an ancient secret. And there, amidst the smell of paper and the ticking of the clock in the background, something inside her stirred. A memory surfaced, the smell of fresh paint, the soft sound of bristles on canvas, the simple pleasure of creating something that had never existed before. For a moment, she saw herself again in that makeshift studio from decades ago, with the windows open and the late afternoon light illuminating her face. The world seemed smaller, but her heart was immense. And to think that all of that had been hidden away for so long made her smile, her eyes welling up. As she gazed at her own image, a question began to throb within her. At what exact moment had she ceased to be that woman? When were the brushes replaced by pots, the paintings by commitments, and art by obligations? No one ever stopped her from continuing to paint. She simply stopped, as many do, believing that dreams have an expiration date. But there, at 81 years old and with trembling hands, she realized a hidden truth. Passion doesn't age, it merely slumbers, waiting for the courage to awaken. She spent the rest of the day, with the photo on her desk, like a portal. With each glance, she remembered something different, a color, a song, a laugh. It was like revisiting a place she'd built and forgotten to return to. And when night fell, instead of feeling the usual emptiness, she felt something new, restlessness, a kind of energy that hadn't visited her body in a long time. Maybe it was the beginning of something, or maybe it was just longing for what once was. But somehow, she knew this wasn't a coincidence. It was a calling. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because what was in her hands wasn't just a photograph, it was a mirror of everything time has tried to erase. Sometimes, transformation begins with something as simple as remembering who we were before the world taught us to forget. And it's in that moment that life begins to whisper again, begging to be lived with the same boldness as when everything was still possible. Perhaps the most beautiful thing about this story is realizing that a new beginning doesn't always come from outside. It comes when we rediscover ourselves within, when the memory of who we were breathes again, even if it's by an oversight of fate. Write in the comments a word that sums up what awakens within you when you think about this. Maybe memory, maybe rediscovery, or maybe something only you can translate. The next day, she woke before sunrise. There was something different about the way the air blew through the house, a kind of lightness she hadn't felt in a long time. She walked to the kitchen, made coffee, and looked again at the photograph on the table. This time, she didn't cry. She just smiled, that shy smile of someone silently deciding something. After so many years, she was going to paint again. She went to the small neighborhood store and bought new paints, brushes, and a white canvas. The cashier asked if it was a gift for anyone, and she replied, almost laughing, "It's a gift for me." Back home, she dusted off the old wooden table that supported her easel. She spread out the paint tubes like someone organizing memories and stood there observing the colors. Red, yellow, blue, each seemed to carry a forgotten meaning. At first, her hand trembled. The first stroke was uncertain, almost invisible. It was as if the canvas were watching her, waiting for her to remember how to do it. But a few minutes were all it took for something to change. The lines began to flow, the shapes emerged on their own, and she felt her heart beat in time with the past. For the first time in many years, time was no longer her enemy. The clock was still in the same place, but it no longer dictated the rhythm. She lost track of time, immersed in that moment when pain and beauty merge. She painted calmly, blending tones and memories. Each stroke was a sigh, and each color seemed to restore a piece of life to her. When the sun set, her hands were stained, and the floor was covered in splashes. She looked at the painting, unfinished, imperfect, and smiled. Not because it was beautiful, but because it was finally alive. The hidden truth behind that moment is that sometimes a new beginning doesn't come with grand plans or promises. It comes in small, almost invisible gestures, which only the heart understands. It was there, alone, surrounded by silence and color, that she began to rebuild herself. And the more she painted, the more she realized she wasn't trying to recover the past. She was creating something new, something that existed only in the present. What was happening inside her was more than simply resuming a forgotten hobby. It was a complete transformation of mindset, an awakening of the soul after years of slumber. When we allow ourselves to create again, whether with paint, words, or gestures, we access an inner place where fear loses its power and life gains a voice. It was as if the paintbrush were an extension of the soul, translating emotions that no words could express. In the corner of the room, the golden afternoon light reflected off the canvas, creating a subtle, almost spiritual glow. She stepped back for a moment, observing the painting with teary eyes. It wasn't a work of art to be displayed. It was a mirror, and within it, she saw herself not as an elderly woman, but as a woman determined to be reborn. Perhaps the most curious thing is this: sometimes, the courage to change arises when no one is looking, when the world believes it's too late, but the heart insists on starting over. The following days brought a different kind of movement to the house. The living room table, once cluttered with papers and mementos, was now covered in paints, brushes, and small explosions of color. The smell of fresh paint mingled with the aroma of coffee, creating an atmosphere of new beginnings. She would spend hours there, in silence, just listening to the sound of the brush gliding over the canvas. And, curiously, the silence that had once been painful now felt welcoming. It was the sound of life itself speaking again. But the world around her doesn't always understand when someone decides to start over too late. One morning, while she was painting, her children visited her. They watched her for a few seconds, exchanging discreet glances, as if trying to understand what they saw. One of them asked, half jokingly, "Mom, what's all this? Are you setting up a gallery now?" She laughed. She continued painting unhurriedly. The other added, "But why waste money on this now? What do you still want to prove?" She put down her brush, wiped her hands on a stained cloth, and replied with a serenity only years can bestow, "Because I'm still alive." There was no anger, no defensiveness. It was simply a simple truth, and perhaps that's why it was so powerful. The sentence hung in the air as if time had stopped to hear it. The children looked at each other, unsure of what to say. For them, their mother's life had already entered a phase of rest. But for her, rest was what came before death, and she wasn't ready to die yet. It was then that something changed, not only in her, but also in the way others viewed her. For the first time, they realized that aging doesn't mean giving up, that there's a huge difference between surviving and continuing to exist. As they talked, the painting behind her took shape: an open field, a sky in shades of orange and blue, and, in the background, a seemingly endless road. It was impossible to miss the symbolism. This painting was a confession, and also a declaration. It was the portrait of someone who refused to be defined by age. What this woman was discovering went beyond art. It was about mindset, about the courage to allow oneself to change course, even when the map already seems set. There's a hidden truth that many ignore. Time doesn't take away the ability to dream. It merely tests those who still have the courage to do so. And she did. Every gesture, every color on the canvas was a small revolution against the idea that life has an expiration date. In the days that followed, she continued painting, and her children began to watch in silence. They no longer questioned, but simply admired. The woman they saw now was not the fragile mother they feared leaving alone, but a quiet force who inspired without needing to explain anything. She didn't try to convince anyone, she just lived. And deep down, that's what challenges the world most: someone who truly lives, even when everyone thinks their time is up. Perhaps this is where a new beginning becomes contagious. When one person has the courage to choose themselves, others around them begin to rethink their own choices. Transformation never happens in complete silence. It reverberates. And sometimes, what begins with a brush ends up changing the way an entire family sees the meaning of life. Comment below. What word would you use to describe this kind of courage that defies time? Weeks passed, and her home transformed into something new. Where time once seemed to stand still, now there was life in every corner. The walls were covered with canvases leaning against each other, the floor stained with colors, and the air was filled with that unmistakable scent of paint and fresh coffee. The painting had become a kind of silent refuge, a space where she could exist without having to explain anything to anyone. Each morning, the ritual was the same: open the windows, let the light in, and let inspiration arrive on the wind. The neighbors began to notice the unusual movement. Sometimes they'd see her sitting on the porch, her hair tied up haphazardly and an apron covered in colorful spots, as focused as a child discovering the world for the first time. It was beautiful to see. The subtle smile on her face betrayed a peace that hadn't lived there for a long time. And the most curious thing is that she didn't paint to be admired. She painted to understand what she felt, to give form to what words couldn't convey. But soon the canvases began to pile up. There was no more space in the living room or bedroom. And so, on a simple and courageous impulse, she decided to hang some on her front gate. Not to sell, nor to show off, just to share what she was feeling. She placed the paintings there side by side, pinned with clothespins, like someone laying out their soul to dry in the sun. At first she thought no one would notice, but it took only that first afternoon for her to realize something different was happening. People passing by slowed down. Some stopped, others took photos. A neighborhood gentleman commented, "There's something special about these colors. It's like we feel what she felt." And it was true. Each painting carried pure emotion, the kind of feeling that needs no explanation. She watched from afar, hidden behind the curtain, trying to hide her smile. Seeing these strangers connecting with something that had grown within her was like witnessing an everyday miracle. A boy left a faux note pinned to the gate. "Thank you for reminding me that beauty still exists." She read it and cried, not out of sadness, but out of gratitude. Art that began as a remedy for pain had become a bridge, a way to touch hearts without saying a word. There's a powerful truth hidden in these simple gestures. When someone allows themselves to be authentic, when they decide to show vulnerability without fear of judgment, something extraordinary happens. The world responds. Sincerity has an impact, and the courage to be who you are awakens something in people. This woman, without planning anything, was creating transformation around her. She proved that sometimes the power isn't in speaking loudly, but in living truthfully. And in a way, this improvised exhibition became a mirror of her life, open, colorful, and unframed. The gate became an invitation to connection, and each person who stopped there took a piece of that courage with them. Late on a quiet afternoon, as the sun began to touch the rooftops with that golden hue that seems to warm even the soul, she heard voices coming from the gate. They were young, curious, energetic laughter. A group of art students had stopped to look at her paintings. They approached slowly, exchanging comments among themselves, admiring the colors, the free expression of the canvases. One of them said, almost in a whisper, as if unwilling to break the magic of the moment, "These paintings seem alive." She listened from the other side of the window and smiled, unseen. There was something beautiful in seeing young eyes recognize emotion in what was born of pain. A few minutes later, there was a knock on the door. A young man, his hair tied back and his eyes filled with enthusiasm, asked if they could speak with her. She was nervous, unsure how to react to this unexpected attention. He opened the door carefully, the brush still in his hands, his fingertips stained blue. They began asking questions: how long she had been painting, what inspired her, if she had ever exhibited her work anywhere. She answered simply, almost embarrassed, "I paint because I need to breathe." Then came the invitation. They wanted her at a local art event, a community fair where local artists showcased their work. She laughed in disbelief. "Me? At an art event? That must be a mistake." But the looks around her said otherwise. There was genuine admiration there, the kind she hadn't seen in her own eyes in decades. The young men persisted, and one of them added, "People need to see this. Your colors speak volumes that many others can't." When they were alone, she walked to the mirror and fell silent. The woman reflected was different from the one in the old photograph. There were new wrinkles, the marks of a lifetime, but also a glow that hadn't been seen in a long time. For a moment, the fear returned, the fear of judgment, of comparison, of the critical gaze of others. She considered giving up, but the invitation lay on the table, and with it, the memory of the phrase she used to repeat to her husband, "One day I will show my paintings to the world." Perhaps that day had come, just much later than she imagined. There's something powerful about this kind of unlikely encounter. Sometimes, fate uses strangers to ignite within us what seemed extinguished, and that's what happened to her. Those young people, unknowingly, broke down the last wall that still separated her from her own courage. It's not about fame or recognition. It's about belonging, about feeling that regardless of age, you can still be part of something bigger. That night, she couldn't sleep. She stared at the stacked canvases and wondered if she was ready. The answer came not in words, but in feeling, a mixture of nervousness and excitement. For the first time in years, she wasn't afraid of tomorrow. She was curious, and perhaps that's what keeps the spirit young, the desire to keep discovering what else life has to offer. The day of the exhibition arrived faster than she expected. The invitation, which had sat on the table for weeks like a hidden secret, was now real. She woke before dawn, her heart racing as if she'd gone back in time. She chose a simple, light-colored dress and a blue scarf, the same shade she wore in her paintings. As she looked in the mirror, she felt a mixture of nervousness and gratitude. It was hard to believe that, after so long, the world was about to see a part of her that had been hidden for decades. When she arrived, the room was already full. The walls were covered in her paintings, vibrant colors, soft shapes, memories transformed into art. She stood in the doorway for a few moments, observing in silence. People walked slowly between the paintings, their expressions ranging from curiosity to emotion. A woman wept in front of a blue canvas. A young man smiled as he took a photo. A couple embraced as they gazed at a painting of a golden field at dusk. Each reaction was a silent confirmation that something was being touched there, not by technique, but by truth. She never wanted to be an artist. She never sought recognition. She just wanted to heal. But in that moment, she realized that her pain had become a bridge to other hearts. What had been born of loneliness now generated connection. What began as an attempt to rediscover herself became an invitation for others to do the same. It was as if every color, every stroke, told a story about what it means to carry on, even when the world thinks it's over. The young people who invited her were beaming. One of them approached and said, "You know what you're doing here, don't you? You're reminding people that life doesn't end when we get old." She smiled, her eyes welling up. She replied quietly, "I guess I'm just showing that I'm still alive." There's something extraordinary when someone allows themselves to be seen again after so long hidden. True recognition isn't in the applause, but in the invisible impact we leave on others. What she experienced that day was more than an event. It was a reflection of the power of authenticity. When someone has the courage to truly show themselves, they inspire others to do the same. The transformation of one life becomes the seed for many others. At the end of the night, she stood alone in the living room, observing her paintings for the last time. The low lights reflected the colors as if they danced across the walls. She walked slowly among the paintings, touching one or another, as if saying goodbye to a part of her own soul. Outside, the wind was cold, but there was warmth within her. She was no longer the woman who painted to forget. She was the woman who painted to live. Perhaps this is the true beauty of the human journey, discovering, even at the end, that there are still beginnings, that starting over is not a privilege of youth, but a choice that belongs to those who decide not to give up. She walked slowly down the street, a bouquet of flowers in her arms and a sparkle in her eyes no one had seen for a long time. The colorful petals seemed to match the paints still staining her fingers, and the light wind ruffled her white hair as if playing with it. When she reached home, she placed the flowers on the table and looked around. The same home, the same silence, but everything seemed different. There was life where before there had been only memories. Every painting hanging on the walls now told a story she herself had reconstructed with courage, color, and soul. He sat in front of the mirror and studied his reflection. For years, that face had been unfamiliar territory, marked by longing and routine. Now, he saw himself with tenderness. He saw in the wrinkles not the weight of time, but the paths he had traveled to get there. The smile appeared slowly, like someone recognizing themselves for the first time after a long absence. There was light there, a light that came not from youth, but from the peace of someone who understands the value of the moment. As she took off her shoes, she remembered when she believed life ended with loss, that grief was the end of everything. But that night, she realized the truth that time had taken decades to reveal. Life doesn't end when we lose someone. It ends when we stop rediscovering ourselves. and she had finally rediscovered herself, not as a wife, mother, or widow, but as a woman, whole, sensitive, alive. She picked up one of the paintings and placed it on her lap. The colors were strong, but there was something soft about the collection. Perhaps it reflected what she had become, a blend of strength and delicacy. She touched the canvas with her fingers and smiled. She thought of everything she had experienced, the times she wanted to give up, the mornings when silence seemed to scream. And now, there, she realized how much each pain had served as paint for this new phase. Sadness had transformed into art, and art into freedom. There's a revelation few people have the courage to see. Youth isn't a phase of life, it's a mindset. She discovered this unintentionally, between brushstrokes and memories, when she understood that the body can age, but the soul only ages when it stops dreaming. Time, which once seemed like a thief, revealed itself to be a patient teacher, teaching what truly matters, being present, feeling, creating, loving, starting over. She turned off the lights and remained silent for a moment, just listening to the soft sound of the night. Outside, the gate still, displayed a few screens, now illuminated by the yellowish streetlight. A couple passing by stopped to look. She watched from the window, unseen, and felt a warmth in her chest, not out of vanity, but out of gratitude. It was beautiful to realize that her courage to start over continued to inspire people she didn't even know. The clock struck 9, but she was in no hurry to sleep. She picked up her old notebook, the one her husband used to jot down short poems, and wrote a short sentence, almost a whisper. Life doesn't end when we lose. It ends when we stop trying. She closed the notebook slowly and set it on the table next to the flowers. Comment below on what this part of the story awakens in you. It could be a word, a memory, or just that feeling that arises when the soul recognizes that there is still time to blossom. She stood there for a few minutes, watching the reflection of the flowers in the window. The night was silent, and every little light on the street seemed to pulse, to the same calm rhythm as her heart. She grabbed her coat, walked to the porch, and took a deep breath. The cool air brought a sense of clarity, as if the entire universe had stopped just to listen to this new chapter being born within her. For the first time in years, there was no rush, no fear, only presence. Everything urgent no longer mattered. What mattered now was the simple fact of being alive. As she gazed at the sky, she remembered all the times she'd thought about giving up. How many? Mornings she'd believed it was no longer worth starting anything. And yet, something inside her never completely extinguished. Maybe it was faith, maybe it was stubbornness, maybe it was love, but that little fire remained there, waiting for the right moment to reignite. The truth is, we all carry that fire, even when we cover it with the ashes of time. A breath, a gesture, a memory is all it takes for the flame to reignite. He went back inside and looked once more at the hanging paintings. It was strange to think that all of them, the colors, the shapes, the stories, were born of a pain that once seemed unbearable. And yet, here was proof that even sadness can transform into beauty when it finds courage. That was what she was proud of. Not the paintings, but the decision not to let fear be the final point. There's a silent truth hidden in every new beginning. Time doesn't erase those who have the courage to change. Mindset is what defines destiny. People believe that age limits when, in fact, it liberates. When you reach this point in your journey, you no longer need to prove anything to anyone. Just live fully, lightly, and gratefully. This is the true revolution, understanding that each new dawn is an opportunity to begin again, to reinvent yourself, to be the author of your own story. She ran her hand over the table, turned off the lights, and stared into the darkness. Silence was no longer an enemy. It was a shelter, a sacred space where the mind rested and the soul breathed. She smiled to herself, remembering the words her husband used to repeat when she doubted herself. You were born to create, not to stop. And finally, she understood what he meant. Creating isn't just painting, writing, or singing. It's continuing to believe, even when the world tries to convince you it's too late. Perhaps you too have let a dream fall asleep in time. Perhaps there's something inside you begging to be reborn. Age isn't the end of the road. It's the beginning of courage. If you've made it this far, perhaps this story touched you in some way. And if it did, it's because there's something inside you that still believes in new beginnings. Stories like this are a reminder that life always finds a way to blossom, even in the coldest seasons. And that's exactly why this space exists, to remind you, every now and then, that it's never too late to change the course of your own story. So, if this kind of content resonates with you, inspires you, or makes you think differently, subscribe to the channel. That's what keeps this work alive and gives me the motivation to continue telling stories that truly resonate. And please also leave a like, not just for the video, but for the connection we've created together so far. Oh, and if you made it to the end, write in the comments. That message was for me. I want to know who has stayed with me this far, who has listened with an open heart and understood that deep down, this isn't just her story. It's a little bit of the story of all of us. And before you go, there's a video here to complement this conversation. Click and stay with me there. I think it will make you think even more about what it truly means to live.